Go ahead and get started. Thank you for attending. There are, just so you know, there are also folks watching online as well. We're streaming at the same time live on YouTube. So this is a Data Science Dojo Bootcamp information session. So it's designed to be two things simultaneously. It's designed to be informative, and it's designed to be marketing at the same time. So please forgive me in advance. It's the nature of the beast. I do want to set some expectations, especially for the folks that are watching on the YouTube stream. Most of this presentation is going to be focusing on the Seattle area. And the reason why that is, and I'm going to be completely transparent, due to Washington state regulations, we have to do things a little bit different with our boot camps in the Seattle area than we do in other parts of the world. So while this will be mostly focused on the Seattle area, if you're not in the Seattle area or you're interested in boot camps outside the Seattle area, there's still a lot of value to be had. But we will be focusing primarily on the Seattle area because of these nuances of the regulatory requirements. So before I start, who am I? My name is Dave Langer. I am the VP of Data Science for Data Science Dojo. What does that mean? Well, it means I apply my 20 years in technology to Data Science Dojo's core business, which is educational services in the data science area. My last job before joining Data Science Dojo was at Microsoft, where I ran a team of technical program managers that were responsible for the data platforms that ran Microsoft's multi-billion-dollar supply chain operations area. About 5 years ago, when I was pursuing my master's degree in computer science, I got hooked on predictive modeling, machine learning, everything that's commonly referred to as data science these days. Because I was able to take a machine learning course from a gentleman who was on the second place Netflix prize winning team. And he really turned me on to this idea that I'd had a background of doing BI and analytics where I had data and I could go look backwards in time and figure out why sales were down or expenses were up, what's called descriptive analytics these days. But he really turned me on to the whole idea of you can take that data and actually look into the future. You can have a crystal ball, and that was like super exciting. So I got totally hooked. Part of what I do is my obsession, and this is why it's up there, is I do post tutorials on data science. If you want to look me up on YouTube, I have a bunch of tutorials. They've got about 500,000 views right now on there on various types of topics. So you can kind of get some indication of my teaching style by looking at those videos without actually having to necessarily go to a boot camp. And then lastly, I joined Data Science Dojo at the beginning of February, mainly because I really believed in this thing down here. It says data science for everyone. The founder of the company, Raja, and we'll talk about this more in a bit, he really does believe this. When we talk about the kinds of students that we have in our boot camp, they run the gamut in terms of experience by design. So we really believe data science for everyone. When I created my YouTube channel before I joined Data Science Dojo, I had the same philosophy, that you didn't need a PhD in statistics and you didn't need a PhD in machine learning to learn some data science and apply it in your daily work and get business value. So it was a nice philosophical fit, Data Science Dojo and myself. Not to mention the fact that the founder, Raja, is just a good guy. Okay, so as I mentioned, we are a data science educational service provider. Our primary product offering is in line with our core mission, which is data science for everyone. We have a global reach. So far, to date, we have trained over 2,500 people from 330 companies. A lot of big names are listed: Microsoft, Shell, Amazon, Boeing, Apple, you name it. And we do it in many, many countries. So we teach in Europe, we teach in Dubai, we've taught in India, we teach in Canada, the United States. So we have a global reach. Truly, we have a global reach. Our core product offering is a public boot camp, the 5-day boot camp, but we also do corporate training. We've done corporate training for a number of different companies, including Microsoft, for example, where we custom tailor our curriculum to the needs of the individual client. It doesn't have to be 5 days, it could be 3 days. We can work with the customer to pick and choose which types of topics they want to see taught to their employees. So we're going to talk today mainly about the public boot camp. So our target student is a professional who's interested in getting foundational skills in data science. Now this is important because if you go Google data science boot camps, you'll get a lot of different companies. And a lot of them predominantly fall into the 8 and 12 week category, and they're really for career changers. People who are interested in changing careers have time to take off of work, go to school for 8 to 12 weeks, full time, very intensive. Our target student, our ideal student, isn't necessarily in that category. They're a working professional. Maybe they are a professional BI person, and they've decided that they need to up-level their skills in data science to move into the next level in the job, or the business requirements of their business are pushing them to say, look, we've got this descriptive analytics thing, this BI thing, we got a good handle on that. What we really want now is to move more into predictive analytics, data science. We're gonna go get you trained, get you a foundation, have you come back and start applying those skills when you come back from the boot camp. That's really our target student. I will not lie. When I say this is an intensive, immersive experience, it really is. So when you sign up for our boot camp, first thing we do is we give you 8 hours of work to do even before you even set foot in the classroom. So that's fundamentals of data mining, introduction to R programming, a bunch of other things. 8 hours of content. So this is self-study beforehand to kind of get you bootstrapped into some base knowledge. Then you're actually in class for 50 hours. So it's 8 a.m. to 6 p.m., as we'll see in a second, every day, 5 days. So it's 50 hours in class. And then afterwards, depending on what level of package that you choose to purchase, it can be 10 or more hours of post-boot camp work as well. So the boot camp logistics, as I mentioned, it's Monday through Friday, 8 a.m. to 6 p.m. During the boot camp, we also give you homework. So when I taught in Paris last November, I had a few students who were really super motivated. As we'll talk about in a second, in the Kaggle competition, they were going on 3 hours of sleep a night. We could go in and look at their Kaggle submissions, and they were doing it like 3 o'clock in the morning, and then coming to the boot camp at 8 a.m. So when I say it's intensive, you don't have to do that, obviously, if you don't want to, but some folks do. I'm just saying, I'm not lying when I say it's intensive and immersive. Really, really say, look, if you're going to do this, I would really advise saying, look, I'm going to take that week. I'm not going to answer work email, in theory, right? Because it's very, very intensive by design. To help motivate and cement the things that you're learning during the boot camp, we actually run a private, dedicated Kaggle competition. So just the folks that you're in your cohort with, as well as previous students, we have a dedicated Kaggle leaderboard. We do the Titanic competition, if you know what that is. And during the week, as you learn more and more and more, you get to apply it and actually do machine learning, build a model, see how well it does, compete with your other students. And we do offer some prizes at the end as well. So a lot of students find this extremely motivating. Like I said, sometimes they're up at 3 o'clock in the morning doing work. So this is a good thing. So here are the instructors. So the gentleman in the middle is Raja Iqbal. He is the CEO and founder. He holds a PhD in computer science. And previous to starting Data Science Dojo, he worked at Microsoft where he was a data scientist working for Bing and Bing Ads. Really, really smart guy, loves teaching. He's very passionate about education and data science both. And he's like I said before, I mean, he's a good guy. Fook is our senior data engineer. He predominantly teaches our data engineering focused aspects of the bootcamp, which we'll talk about during the curriculum section. And then lastly, there's this joker on the left, Dave Langer, recent addition. I tend to teach most of the mathematically intensive portions of the bootcamp. And you can see our various backgrounds. I hold a master's degree in computer science, and Fook has a bachelor's degree from the University of Washington. Yay. But what's more important than who we are is how we teach. So, as I mentioned earlier, we have a diverse group of students, and I'll give you an example. So I taught, along with Fook, we taught a boot camp in Amsterdam last month. And we had 30 students in the classroom, and I do an old Microsoft PM trick, the show of hands survey thing, right? And I said, okay, how many folks here would self-identify with the statement, I have a strong math and statistical background? Only 6 people raised their hands. Only 6 out of 30. And then I said, okay, great, that's cool. Glad to see, welcome. How many of you would self-identify as having strong programming backgrounds? Only 3 people raised their hands out of 30. And they weren't actually the same people, interestingly enough. So that gives you some idea that that's 9, so 21 out of 30 of the people in the room that didn't self-identify as having a strong programming background or a strong mathematical background. So we're really targeting a broad swath of folks to come. We're really data science for everyone. So given that we have a broad spectrum of folks that come in, we have to be very, very careful in how we teach things, because we would be doing you a disservice, for example, if we said, math doesn't matter. Math doesn't matter, because it does matter. In the end, machine learning algorithms are all based on math. And quite frankly, if you're going to build a predictive model and you don't understand the underlying mathematics, you can't tune the model and make it optimal. So you have to have some knowledge of math. So as a consequence, we focus mostly on fundamentals and intuition. So if you don't have a super strong math background, that's okay. Hang with us while we're going through the math lecture. And at a certain point, if you go, whoa, it's too much, that's okay. Try and just grok the intuition. Try to understand the intuition. Right? For example, and if this doesn't make any sense to you, it would if you came to the boot camp. What is L1 and L2 regularization? What do they mean? How do they work? Why would I use them? If you don't know the math, you can't really answer that question very well and put it in practice. So what we do is we focus on the intuition. Now, if you have a stronger mathematical background, you're going to get more out of it. That's okay too. That's okay too. But here's the thing. Even with 8 hours of pre-boot camp work, 50 hours of awesomeness, homework every night, 10 plus hours of work afterwards, you can't really call yourself a data scientist. And we wouldn't tell you to do that either. What you know, most importantly, what you know is what you don't know. Because we'll give you a broad spectrum of ideas, a broad spectrum of knowledge. And you'll say, for example, and we'll see a video in a bit from a gentleman who attended one of our boot camps, he was particularly interested in recommender systems. We spent about 4 hours talking about recommender systems. There's no way you're going to be a recommender system expert in 4 hours. But you will start to know the things that you need to study afterwards. Boot camp is just the start of your journey. It gives you the tool, it gives you the knowledge. If I could use the metaphor, it gives you a map of how you need to guide your journey going forward. What do you want to study? What do you want to learn more about? So this last point is important. We try very much to strive a careful balance between hitting all the topics, right? You come with an expectation that you're going to learn certain things, and we strive to do that. But we also try to say, look, because we have a broad spectrum of folks, we just don't want to say, look, check, 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 check. And if people aren't following along, well, that's just too bad, because we have to get through all of these modules by the end of the day today. We try to emphasize a pace to achieve these above goals rather than going through a checklist. So for example, if sometimes, let's say for example, if linear regression, we teach gradient descent, the algorithm. For some folks, that's really intense mathematically, but it's super important to understand because that's how you scale a very useful machine learning algorithm to data at a very large size. We may spend more time on that just to make sure everyone is getting at the right level of understanding. We try to emphasize that as part of our philosophy. And by the way, this is not a one-way conversation. You can raise your hand and stop me and ask any question you'd like. So let's meet John. This John is the gentleman I mentioned earlier who was one of our students. So if you're interested, if you haven't been to our website, you can go to this URL and you can see a whole bunch of testimonials. Actually, I just noticed there were some from the students that I taught in Amsterdam being added. But let's hear from John.
So I've been interested in data science for some time, and then the opportunity at work came along where I wanted to do some predictive analytics. Nobody really knew what that meant or how we could apply it at work. So I started looking around at some options, and you hear about the Coursera course, the data science course, and so I started that, and it just didn't fit. It wasn't. I needed more, And so that's when I started looking for something in person, live, where I could go and have interactions and learn at a much deeper level. Well, I chose this boot camp primarily because it was a limited amount of time. It's 5 days. I could come in, I could take a week off of work, I could do it, and then I could go home. So I didn't have to spend 6 weeks or 12 weeks, and it didn't cost $60,000 like some of these master's programs in data science. Yes, I definitely feel like I can apply this. In fact, Monday I'm starting a project, and we're going to be actually using this stuff, and it's the perfect intro to what I'm starting very soon. It's amazing. Data science is for everyone, and that actually in the past 5 years, data science, the term data scientist has been this buzzword that, oh, you need a PhD, oh, you need a master's in mathematics. But you don't have to be a PhD, and you can really get a ton of value out of it every single day.
So as I mentioned, so John uh, came to us from a company, and
So I've been.
well, sorry, John, we're done with you. So John came to us from a company in Idaho, and so I taught him recommender systems, and that was exactly the project he mentioned he was talking about in the video. He went back on Monday because his company had no recommendation strategy whatsoever. They were in a B2B context, but apparently they had a large catalog of products, and they had no way to actually suggest to their customers, hey, you may want to buy these products based on past history, based on what other people are doing, that sort of thing. And he was super excited by what he learned, and he was going to go apply it the very next week. What he also learned, it's not mentioned in the video, but what he also learned was that he had a lot more studying to do, because you can't learn, even if you had a full week dedicated to recommender systems, even that wouldn't be enough. But he knew enough to start saying, okay, where do I start my journey? What are the things I should be looking at? What are the things I should be doing? Okay, so let's talk about the bootcamp curriculum. Some of you picked up the handouts that we have. I'm just going to go ahead and throw up the PDF version of this. So this is the full 5-day curriculum. And I'm not going to lie, I'm throwing this up here for some shock and awe value. It's contrived, I know. Bear with me. We do cover all of this stuff in 5 days. All of it. Not obviously in the nth level of detail. That's not it's not possible. But that's not our goal. Remember, our goal is to teach you enough to gain you the intuition, and most importantly, give you the map to guide your journey after the boot camp to say, hey, I'm really interested in text analytics. What are some things that I should be looking into? So I won't drain this because it's a lot of stuff. There's a few things, though, that I should call out that are super important that we talk about. First is regression algorithms. As I mentioned earlier, one of the things we teach in particular is gradient descent. Gradient descent is how you scale a linear regression model to big data scales using things like Hadoop or Spark. We teach you that. We teach you the mathematics behind that. For example, the 6 people in Amsterdam that I talked about that had strong mathematical backgrounds, 3 of them were trained econometricians with master's degrees or higher. They didn't know gradient descent. We taught them that because they had learned a more traditional way that was focused on small data problems. Works just fine, but it was focused on small data problems because economists and scientists don't work with big data. If you're going to work with big data, you need to learn stuff like stochastic gradient descent. That's what we teach. So that's super important. We go into the math, we teach you, we give you the intuition. This is really super important. Another thing that we teach that's really super important is classification algorithms. We spend quite a bit of time teaching you about trees and how they work. Fraud or not fraud, approval loan or not approval loan, that sort of thing. Because we spend a lot of time on that as well. So the 2 biggies, right? Classification and regression. Those are the 2 main forms of machine learning, really, when you start talking about a predictive model. We also talk about recommender systems, extremely important. We have coverage of big data and engineering. We also have a hands-on IoT lab using Azure. So we will literally run through a project where you build, oh, here's my phone. Here's my phone. You use your phone and you build a data pipeline from your phone into the cloud through an IoT pipeline and out through some analytics. You do that in class. You get a flavor of what the art of the possible is. Now, are you going to be able to like code something up like this from scratch? No, but we teach you the basics, the fundamentals, so you can have that roadmap on your journey to say, well, I'm really super interested in data engineering. I want to learn more about that. You'll now know where you should go to learn more. So the last thing I want to bring up is recommender systems. And the reason why this is so important is because they're prevalent everywhere on the internet now. Everything's a recommender system. Every app you can think of, every platform that's popular has a recommender system in it. Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, LinkedIn, everything. Amazon, of course, right? Everything. So recommender systems, huge, very important as well. So we cover a lot of stuff. Any questions on that? Okay, I'm getting nervous. No one's asking me any questions. Thank you, sir.
Well, RPG probably doesn't count, does it, for the programming language?
How many people know what RPG is? If I may, sorry, sir, if I may characterize, we both share some gray hair. So coincidence? Probably not. So very good question. Thank you, sir. So we have coverage in the totality of our content for four main things. Azure ML, so that's Azure Machine Learning in the Azure Cloud. Amazon Machine Learning in the Amazon Cloud. Python and R. We provide full scripts, equivalent scripts for everything that we do in both Python and in R. However, but due to the time constraints, we focus primarily on using R and Azure ML in class. So, good question. Yeah.
Do anything about the Google TensorFlow?
No. Question was, do we do anything with Google TensorFlow? Not at this point. Believe it or not, we've had, well, probably do believe it, we've had lots of requests. Lots of people say, well, why don't you use this and why don't you do that? So we have to say, okay, well, what do most of the students want most of the time and kind of focus on that. So it's been Python and R and Amazon and Azure so far, but we probably should be looking at Google as well based on feedback like yours. Great. Any other questions? Cool. Excellent. Stop me with questions. Please, please, please. Okay. So what we covered before was general for all the boot camps that we do all around the world, right? Our teaching philosophy, who we are, what our target students are, our teaching methodology, and the core curriculum all up. What we're going to get into right now is the subtle differences between the Seattle market in particular, because I'm assuming that's what you guys care about. Although if you want to fly to Dubai next month to have me teach you there, sweet, come along, but I don't think that's very likely. So we have some boot camp options for the Seattle market because of those regulatory requirements from the state of Washington that I mentioned earlier. And this is what they're listed at as right now. So we have a tiered pricing model with tiered benefits, and we're going to go into more detail about what all these things mean in a bit. But the first thing that I want to point out is that we have these two options here, which are 2-day and 3-day. And then we have these 5-day bundles. The 5-day bundles covers that shock and awe PDF that I showed earlier, right? Because you're enrolled for the full 5 days, so you get all of the coverage. In the Seattle market, you have the option of slicing and dicing that content into a 2-day chunk or a 3-day chunk, if you so choose. You don't have to, but you can. And what you see here is the comparison between the various things. The first thing that I want to point out is that the first 5 lines here are essentially the same, right? In-person training, learning materials, sample code, breakfast, lunch, dinner, not dinner, sorry, unlimited refreshments, and you have access to the learning portal. Our learning portal essentially is our internet presence where it has our slide decks, it has our videos, it has quizzes and supplementary learning materials. It also includes access to our GitHub repo, or repository, where all of our scripts are located. As long as you have access to the learning portal in the GitHub, you will get updates. As we update content, you refresh your GitHub, you get all the new content. Or you go back to Learning Portal, you get all the new content. So as long as you have access, you have a steady feed of all the improvements and expansions that we're making to the curriculum. You have access to that for these various time periods. And not surprisingly, the better packages have longer access. Now, what's different is when you get down here. So as I mentioned, we use Azure ML quite extensively in class. We also use Azure for our IoT and big data. So you can sign up for a free trial subscription with Azure. And at these levels, that's what you need to do. At these levels, we will actually put you on our Azure subscription. We'll allocate you an account. Now, there's pluses and minuses, to be quite frank. If this makes things easier for you, you don't have to sign up, you don't have to provide Microsoft with a credit card or anything like that. The downside is when we're done with the boot camp, we have to deallocate your account. So you're going to lose everything that's in there. If you have your own Azure subscription, it stays around. So it's a trade-off, to be sure. But for some folks, they're like, I don't really care. I want the convenience. Okay, that's good. Reference books. Next up is our reference books, which are 3 hand-picked books by the man himself, Raja Iqbal, to help you with your data science journey. One is a book on statistics. Very gentle introduction. Very, very, very friendly introduction to statistics. It's a great book. There's one book on R programming, and then there's a book on the general application of analytics in the business world. All very useful books. Get very high marks from our students regarding their content and their usefulness, because typically what happens is during the boot camp, they're not reading these books. Come on, they're up at 3 o'clock in the morning. But afterwards, we get a lot of positive feedback that the books are helpful to reinforce what they learned during the boot camp. Next up is office hours. That essentially means, if you would like, you can access me, or you can access Raja, or you can access Fu. To ask us questions for help, that sort of thing. It's like office hours at a university with your professors, essentially. You have access to us to ask questions. Now, at the sensei level, the main difference here is you get mentoring for a data science project. What that means in practice is that you and your other sensei level students get combined in a Kaggle team, and then one of the instructors becomes a member of your Kaggle team and helps you do a Kaggle competition from beginning to end. So helps you with questions, helps you with feature engineering, helps you debug, helps you with the software engineering process, all that sort of thing. For example, I'm doing this right now with some folks from the Amsterdam cohort. We're actually doing an image recognition contest on Kaggle right now. Very, very complicated problem, very, very intense. So I'm helping them out with, okay, look, here are some tactics that you use. For example, take your images and manufacture more data by moving the data around a little bit, and that gives you more data examples and makes you allow, that sort of thing. All the kind of help that you would hope to expect from a mentor.
How long does that run, Dave, the mentoring?
How long does the mentoring run? It runs as long as the Kaggle competition. So typically what we do is we try to target competitions that have at least a month before they end, after the end of the boot camp. In the prime example that we're using for Amsterdam, it was a 2-month competition. So it's 2 months worth of mentoring here for a data science project. And a lot of our students find this extremely useful, because if you don't necessarily have an immediate need like John Butler did to apply what you learned at work, and a lot of folks are in that circumstance, this helps keep the learning going, because it helps keep you motivated. Because you're signed up for a competition, you're working with other people, it helps you to keep exercising that muscle, building that muscle, data science muscle. And that's super important, because as I mentioned earlier, we can't make you a data scientist in a week. So if you come for a week, you do all the stuff, and then you go back to your day job and you're not using it anymore, it's like any other technical skill. You're just going to lose it over time. You have to build on it. So this is a really good way for folks to do that. And also, it lowers the intimidation factor. I remember when I did my first Kaggle competition years ago, I had no idea what I was doing. And I did some really silly things, like, for example, I built a model and I put the passenger ID in it. And I was so happy. I'm like, I am a genius, because my model predicted 100% accuracy on the training set. Of course it did. It knew the passenger number. Passenger number 1 lived. Passenger number 3 died. I thought it was awesome. So I can help you avoid stuff like that. Don't do what I did. Yeah. So that's what folks are. That's a lot of folks find that useful. Okay, I'm going to pause there. Any questions?
How much data science earned in Microsoft?
Pardon?
How much data science earned in Microsoft?
How much do data scientists get paid at Microsoft?
What's the salary range for data science and senior data science?
That's so I used to be a manager at Microsoft, so I can kind of answer that question with pretty good precision. I don't know if I can, if I should. It depends on the level. So, like most technology companies on the West Coast, Microsoft pays well. Pays well. You're going to make a lot more working at Microsoft, for example, than you're going to make at working at other companies that are maybe in old economy businesses. So, pardon? Total compensation? Yeah, and more, depending on the level. Oh yeah. Yeah. And you put me on the spot, man. By asking that, I'm trying to walk a real tightrope. But as we said, we wouldn't say, come to our data science boot camp. We'll get you a job at Microsoft making, 150K or 200K or whatever. No, we're not saying that. What we're saying is, if let's say you're already working Microsoft, like maybe people I used to manage. You're a program manager in a BI team, so you have a certain amount of data analytical skills, but you're interested in maybe moving into a data science role at Microsoft over time. How do I bootstrap into the skills? And I can't take 12 weeks off of work to learn them. This may be an option for you. That's where we're going. That's where we're going for. That was an unexpected question. Thank you, though. Keep me on my toes. Any other questions?
I'm a little confused about 2-day and 5-day. Is that just physically being here for 2 days because the curriculum you basically all covers, right?
Yes, that's a good question. So let me reflect back. The question is, I'm a little confused by the 2-day and 3-day versus the 5-day. What's going on? So literally, this is the way to think about it. If you buy Dojo 2, you come for Monday and Tuesday, and then you leave. If you buy Dojo 3, you come for Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday. And what we map, and we'll get to the details in a second, you'll see the actual breakdown, that determines what you learn, is the days that you arrive, because we have a fairly standardized curriculum. I know I said that we don't try to go through a checklist, but in general, we tend to cover these topics in a structured way on these days, and which package you pick determines what modules you learn, essentially. And we'll get into more detail on that. Very good question. Very good question. Yeah.
Can you catch up even if you just show up on the
Pardon?
day 3? Can you catch up or nothing?
Yeah.
That's not incremental.
Yeah. So the question is, can you catch up on day 3? Very good question. What I will propose in a later slide is that the Dojo 3 works if you fall into a particular type of category, which is I don't need to catch up. I already know the things that you teach on days 1 and 2, so I don't want to come and learn them because I already know them, basically. That's what it boils down to. If you don't know R programming, if you don't have any data science or analytical background, let's say, which a lot of our students do, and you want to learn as much as you possibly can, you probably don't want to be over on this side of the spectrum. You probably want to be here, generally speaking. Right? Now, even over here, you still get access to the pre-bootcamp materials, obviously, but what you don't get access to necessarily is all of the high quality teaching, all the quality time with me, somebody like me. It's a good question. Okay, so to the lady's earlier question, here's what you learn if you buy the Dojo 2 curriculum. So you get all the live webinars. Right? This is all the pre-material. This is the pre-material, right? Introduction to big data, fundamentals of data mining, introduction to R programming, introduction to Azure ML, introduction to Amazon ML, AWS ML. That's all self-study beforehand. And I will, if you're interested in getting the most out of your bootcamp experience, please do all of these. please do all of these. And if you can only focus on a few, because 8 hours is it's not a trivial amount of time. These two are the most important. Now, somewhere in Pakistan, Raja may be cringing right now that I said that. He may disagree with me, but right now, I would tell you if you could only focus on two, these would be the two that I would focus on. If we could only focus on three, it'd be these three. Because we use R and Azure ML predominantly in the hands-on and the bootcamp. That's the only reason why. And I will admit, as some folks know, I'm a self-confessed R junkie. I have a bias. So I will always tell you to study R. Always. Okay. So the rest of what you learn is mapped to the days of the boot camp. So you're there for Monday and Tuesday, day 1 and day 2. So we spend about 6 hours data exploration and visualization. I would argue, and if you watch my YouTube tutorials, I go off on this ad nauseum, that this is actually the single most important thing you do as a data scientist. If you don't know your data, if you don't understand your data, you can have the fanciest algorithm in the world, you can have the biggest servers and the biggest Hadoop cluster, doesn't matter. Because feature engineering is the single most important thing. Understanding your data and engineering the features that make the machine learning models work the best, single most important thing. Next up, what you learn is introduction to predictive analytics and classification. This is where we start talking at base about predictive models and classification and what they mean. Next up, we talk about the evaluation of predictive models. Okay, I know how to build one. I know how to build a classification model. Did somebody live or die on the Titanic? Is this fraud or not fraud? Should I approve this loan request or not approve this loan request? But how do I know the model's any good? Right? If you're going to put the model in production and base your business on it, you better hope it's good. So we teach you how to do that. And then lastly, what you cover is ensemble methods. And what ensemble methods are, essentially are, hey, if one model is good, many models working together is probably better. So this talks about the theory and the mathematics about why ensemble methods actually work better. So that's what you learn in Dojo 2. So I'll pause there for any questions, because you guys are starting to ask good ones. Yes?
So those webinars, are those your content or you're just referring it?
Those are our content.
To other people's content?
Our content. It is our content. It's all 100% Data Science Dojo. So if you love it, we're awesome. If you hate it, you got no one to blame but us. And by the way, if you sign up for the boot camp and you attend, we take extensive feedback from all of our students because we want it. And sometimes they're brutally honest about the quality of our content, and we would like you to do the same. So, but it's all our content. Any other questions?
My question is, right now I'm taking our programming from the Coursera,
Mm-hmm.
and it takes like 4 weeks. So this one seems like within 2 days you have the contents.
So if I understand your question correctly, Dave, I'm enrolled right now in a 4-week Coursera R programming course. That takes 4 weeks. How much am I going to get? How much am I going to learn in just one video? And the answer, quite honestly, is you're not going to learn as much as you would learn in a 4-week Coursera course. I mean, it's impossible, right? But again, you got to remember who our target audience is. It's a broad spectrum of folks. We have some folks who show up who are very, very experienced R programmers already, and they don't even take the video. And we have some folks that have absolutely no programming background whatsoever. So this is really just a jump start into basics. Can you be reasonably functional in R? And then, of course, through the week, we tack on more and more stuff. So for example, this whole module right here is all based in R, all based in R. So we use ggplot2, we use Lattice, a bunch. If you don't know what that is, that's okay. It's a bunch of frameworks for actually doing visualization. Now, we wouldn't claim to make you an R expert by the end of the boot camp. There's just no way we could do that. Good question. Yeah.
The languages R and Python, is it knowing one language sufficient or knowing both is it recommended?
For the boot camp?
Generally.
In general, okay. It's a good question. So how I will interpret it is along two vectors. The first is because of the time constraints, we don't teach Python, so you don't need to learn both to get the most out of the boot camp. You need to learn R. That's one vector. The other vector is, hey Dave, I want to be a data scientist. What should I put on my LinkedIn profile to get the most chances of getting that? Where'd the gentleman go to ask me about salaries? To get that 150K job. You'd want to know both. It wouldn't help. It wouldn't hurt. But what I always advise people that ask for mentoring on data science is, when you're first starting out, pick one and stick with it. Because it's better to be a master at one than only kind of good at two.
Then my next question is, which should we start first?
R.
Python.
You're asking me. I already told you what I was going to tell you. The answer is, it's my opinion. It's my opinion. The reason why I suggest R is because if you don't have a strong programming background, for example, if you already know Python, I will tell you to focus on Python. If you already know Python, why learn R? There's no point in doing that. But if you don't have a programming background at all, I find that R is actually a bit easier for folks to ramp in on and get productive with than with Python. Because R at base is built around the same conceptual framework that Excel is, which is think of everything essentially as a table, like a table in a worksheet. Everything in R that you care about as a data scientist, you're working with tables in a worksheet. Exactly the same concept. It's so powerful that, in fact, Python had to bolt on that capability with a library called Pandas. And I believe that Pandas is not nearly as good as native R. So I think it's easier for folks with it, because everyone that is interested in data science knows Excel to a certain extent. So it jumpstarts you into R. That's my belief. But again, my opinion, my biases freely out there. However, if you were going to go target, for example, jobs in Silicon Valley, you'd probably want to learn Python because that's more popular down there. Python's popular here too, but generally speaking, if you knew R and you were a master and you knew all the data science stuff, no company's going to tell you no just because you don't know Python, because data scientists are so hard to find. That's why I said pick one and stick with it until you get really good with it.
So, how long it would take for like decently able to program in R? Like how long a person can take?
Decently. Well, so as a software engineer back in the day, coders consider themselves artists. And would Picasso ever said that he was done learning how to be a good artist? Probably not. So to be reasonably proficient as an R programmer for data science, it's going to be less about learning the particulars of the language. That'll actually be relatively easy. It's going to be everything else, right? Manipulating, for example, manipulating a table in a worksheet in Excel, relatively easy. Adding columns, putting in formulas, not too difficult. Same thing in R, that's not too difficult. What becomes more difficult in Excel, for example, is how do I use all the fancy functions? How do I do VLOOKUPs? How do I use VBA code, macros? In the R analogy, that would be machine learning algorithms. That's where it really starts to come in. Sure.
Just echo a little bit on Professor. It's my observation seems like R. Even I know Python, I want to learn R because I feel R can give you more visualization stuff than Python. Is that correct?
So, boy, you guys are just like hitting them, just tossing them over the plate for I can. So the question was, hey, Dave, another aspect of R that I find to be true is that there's more visualization capability in R than there is in Python. Generally speaking, that is actually correct. Now, to be honest, there's lots of work in the open source community to close the gap between Python and R, but still I would say if you're interested in doing visualizations, yeah, R is still better. R is still better.
Well, my perception would be that R is kind of more straight to the statistics, whereas Python is programming language. People write stuff.
Yes.
So it's kind of better for gathering and cleaning data as opposed to.
Yeah, so the observation was R is actually a open source language built by statisticians for statisticians originally. It is a open source version of a language called S, which is a proprietary language from AT&T. And yeah, the answer is yes. As long as your worldview is I want to work with data, I want to analyze data, and I want to do math, pandas, for example, then you can generally speaking in Java. Now that being said, Java has plenty of machine learning libraries and plenty of capabilities. If you want to go that route, absolutely you can do that. And maybe there are libraries now that make Java look more like Python with pandas. I haven't done Java in quite a while, so I couldn't tell you that. But in general, I would say, look, for your LinkedIn profile, Java and Python or Java and R, goodness. So
How do you get some live project experience?
I'm sorry, say one more time.
Some experience on some live projects?
Experience on a live project. Well, yeah, that's kind of the chicken and egg problem. I want to get a job as that 150K data scientist, but I don't have any projects. So if I don't have any projects, I can't get the job. And if I don't have a job, I don't have any projects. That's where Kaggle comes in, right? That is a traditional. You go look at any blog post about how to become a data scientist. Inevitably, there is a mention of Kaggle. Do Kaggle competitions, and the reason is it's good advice. It helps you a lot. It helps you learn. Now, in the old days, if you achieved a certain rank in Kaggle, like there's this master level rank, that actually held some value in the market because it was very rare for people to be rated Kaggle master, and it was a proof that you knew what you were doing. As with most things, as Kaggle became more popular, that's less the case now than it used to be. But it still gives you hard-won experience. So use Kaggle, build your knowledge, which is why we offer it as part of the Sensei package, and then find stuff in your day job. Find stuff in your day job. Even if nobody's asking for it, just do it. And even if you do it and you show it to your manager and your manager goes, it's okay. Keep doing it. Because eventually somebody will say, ooh. And that's how you start getting into it. So my last job, I was in an IT shop. Every chance I could find to apply data science, even to the point where I probably annoyed my general manager, I did it. Just because I wanted to do it and get the experience. So there's no secret, unfortunately, to it. Yeah, you can't get discouraged. You got to just stick with it. You gotta want it really bad. I know that's cliche, but it's true. It's really true. Good questions. Okay, moving on to the 3-day curriculum. So you'll notice that this is more mathematically heavy. Regression, I mentioned I went off about gradient descent, how important it is. Intro to regression, we teach you gradient descent. Text analytics, we teach you about the vector space model, bag of words, things like that. Very powerful, cool stuff. Recommendation systems, we talk about collaborative filtering, both user-user, item-item. We talk about all various types of recommenders, the cold start problem, the mathematics about how they work, all that jazz. A/B testing and online experimentation. This is the most statistically focused aspect. Good news is that we don't start throwing up like probability density functions or anything like that, but we still talk a lot about statistics. We talk about type 1 and type 2 errors, hypothesis testing, what does the null hypothesis mean, that kind of stuff, because that's super important for A/B testing. The Kaggle competition heats up big time in days 3 to 5. That's because you now know enough to actually start really doing some cool stuff in the Kaggle competition. We teach big data engineering, the IoT. This is all the big data engineering stuff that I was talking about earlier in the cloud. Unsupervised learning. This is listed as a live webinar. Typically, we end up actually doing this in class. We have enough time that we can cover it. So this is predominantly focused on k-means clustering. Most commonly used, predominantly used clustering. A little bit of a personal story. Hopefully it won't diminish me in your eyes. When I first started doing this, I thought clustering was a bunch of hooey. I'm like, who wants to cluster? It's not important. This is actually probably the single most wildly useful thing there is. Once you learn clustering, and you use it all the time in business, all the time in business. For example, I worked in supply chain. Clustering is super important in supply chain operations because it's how you gain some indication of what's the buying pattern of your customers, and then you can use it for inventory optimization and all kinds of good stuff. I mean, it's just super important. Now, the rest of this stuff is live webinars. This is usually post bootcamp. Sometimes if we're making good progress, we can hit logistic regression during the week, and we'll include it in. But if not, you have access to the content post bootcamp if you need it. So you'll notice that Dojo 3 is really focused on the heavy duty stuff. Not that classification and decision trees isn't important, but this is the really intensive math stuff. The math for decision trees isn't nearly as complicated as it is for gradient descent, for example. So I'll pause there for questions. Nope, okay. So that's a lot to digest. Boil it down for me, Dave. Which option should I pick? So a very easy way to think about Dojo 2 is say, all I want to learn is the basics. Teach me some R, teach me how to do some data visualization. I want to be able to explore my data. I want to create some features. Teach me how to train a classification model or an ensemble of classification models and determine if the model's of quality. That's all I want to know. That's essentially what you get with Dojo 2 at base. Dojo 3 is, to the gentleman's earlier question, hey, I already know decision trees, I already know ensemble methods, I already know R, I know how to do data visualization and feature engineering. I don't want to spend time on that. I want to learn text analytics, regression, recommenders, clustering, that sort of thing. And I'm interested in data engineering. I want to learn more about data engineering and how to do it with Azure, for example. That's what Dojo 3 is for. Guru is, I want the complete bootcamp experience. I want it all. I want all 5 days. I want all of it. I need all of it. And then lastly, Sensei is, I want the complete bootcamp experience, but I also want to solidify my knowledge after the bootcamp by working on a Kaggle competition with an instructor to help mentor me along so that I get the most out of my investment. That's really what Sensei is for. So, no hard sell. This is really, you'd have to just say, where do I fit? Right? What's my interest? Where do I fit?
Dave,
Yes?
would it be possible to do the Guru in 2 different weeks?
Yes. So the question is, hey, if I pay for Guru and I can't attend the full boot camp, can I come back? Current company policy is once you pay for tuition, you can come back at any time and refresh your knowledge, including if you buy the Guru and Sensei, the entire boot camp. And we've had people do that. They take the boot camp, they come back months later, and they take it again. They don't have to pay again.
I was thinking of taking the 2 and then come back a few weeks later and doing the 3.
You could do that. Yeah. If you bought the Guru, you could absolutely do that.
Thank you.
And right now, current company policy is you could do that multiple times if you needed to. I'm not saying that you should. I'm just saying that you could. And that's because, like I said, this is Raja's a good guy. He cares. He really does. It's a good question. Yeah.
So I could take 3 days here in Seattle and then when we go to Paris, I can take the first 3 days and see Paris.
Hey, look, if you can get your manager to approve the expense, I'd love to see you. Love to see you. We're talking about doing London. We could go have tea. It'd be great. It'd be awesome. Yes. How often do we teach here in Seattle? So we're having a boot camp week after next here. The next one won't be until May. So we do them reasonably often. Reasonably often. Oops, sorry. Any other questions? Yep, go ahead.
So if I want to learn about sentiment analysis
Sentiment analysis, yes?
and optimization, where does it go?
So specifically, we do not cover sentiment analysis in class during the boot camp. However, obviously, this is where the hard sell comes in. If you buy the Guru or higher level package, you have access to office hours. So you could say, hey, Dave, I'm going to ping you next week after the boot camp to learn more about sentiment analysis. Can you help me? And the answer would be yes, and I can provide you more resources on that. Now, of course, if you're in the boot camp, I can also tell you right then and there. Also, here's some other things, but we don't cover sentiment analysis in particular. And your second part was optimization. What do you mean by that exactly?
Like, you can have this problem trying to figure out the best route. Have several
Yep.
nodes
Yep.
to deliver.
Yep. Yeah, you're speaking my language now. So the question was around optimization. And more prototypically, what you're talking about is an operations research problem, OR problem typically, which is like least path, traveling salesman type of problems. We don't cover any of that sort of thing. So for example, we don't teach prescriptive analytics, right, which is mathematical modeling to actually say, okay, look, given the nature of my network, supply network, what have you, what is the optimal path for actually getting product to the market at the cheapest cost based on my mathematical model? We don't cover that. We don't cover that. If I make sure, did I understand your question? Yeah, like, because I'm assuming you mean like linear, like, you know, like mathematical programming models, like integer, you know, MILPs, mixed integer linear programming models, that sort of thing. Yeah. Yeah. That's actually a relatively old school data science area. Something I'm fascinated about. You know, they actually actually was invented during World War II. Yeah, we don't teach that. It's not part of the boot camp right now. We've had folks ask about it though. Anything else? Good questions. Okay, so as I mentioned, here's the Seattle boot camp. It starts the week after next on the 20th. It's currently being offered at 10% off for those folks that are interested. You can see the discounted pricing here. You now know enough to interpret what it means if you're potentially interested in attending the week after next. We have slots. We'd love to see you. I will be one of the instructors. So either that is a good thing or a bad thing, depending on how you look at it. Check out my YouTube channel if you want to know more about how I teach. So let's talk about payment options. So those are the prices that we have. Folks always ask about payment options, so I figured I'd cover it. So first, obviously, you can pay with a credit card, pay in full with a credit card. If you use your company's card, make sure that your manager knows that you're going to use your company card first. Always a good idea. We can invoice you or your employer as well. We have that option as well. Some companies like to actually have invoices paid. When I worked at Microsoft, for example, I would go to my manager and just use my corporate Amex card with approval, but some companies like invoices. We also have a flex pay option, and that's for folks that want to have a more flexible way to pay for their tuition. So it's an $899 down payment, and then you have 12 monthly payments for the balance. There are no interest or fees on the flex pay, so that's pretty attractive for folks. Also, if you, I didn't put this on the slide, but also let's say you decide, I'm actually going to go with Dave to London, whenever that is. Let's say maybe it's in July, I don't know. And something changes. I can't go now. You can actually say, look, I'm not going to make it. We'll refund you your money. So all your payments up to that date, we'll refund you your money. And of course, we'll refund your money too if you give us, even if you pay in full. Just want to make sure. You don't have to have flex pay to get a refund. Just want to make sure, clear on that. Or alternatively, we're also more than happy to actually move your tuition to a different date, if you'd like. If you say I can't go to London, darn it, I'm going to have to go maybe Seattle in August instead. That's cool. You just email us. We'll set it all up for you. It's all fine. Questions? Yeah. How many in the class? It's a very good question. It runs the gamut. So, for example, I said in Amsterdam, we had 30. Toronto, I think we're at a little over 30, 31, 32, something like that, Arf? Yeah, 31, 32. That's usually on the high end. When I taught in Paris, there were 12 students in Paris. Typically, you want to see typically around in the 20s up to the 30 range, generally speaking. There are 2 instructors, by the way. So there's not just one person, there's 2 of us. So what that allows us to do is when one instructor is lecturing, the other one can go around and help people when they have problems to make sure that everyone gets the best experience. Because I can say this now because I don't work at Microsoft anymore, the Azure UI is clunky and people have problems with it. So we don't want that to detract from your learning experience, so one of the instructors will help to make sure that no student gets stuck. Or if you find, not that this would ever happen, but maybe you find R a little difficult to work with, we can help you with that too.
Where are the classes?
Pardon?
Where are the classes?
Where are the classes held? Good question. So typically we have different venues. For example, right now Seattle is held traditionally in Redmond Town Center at the Marriott in Redmond Town Center. In Toronto, we use a specific conference type place that specializes in providing meeting facilities. Chicago, we do the same thing. In some cities, we use hotels, where in Europe, for example, it's more common to need to use a hotel just because the cities are older and they don't necessarily have dedicated conference facilities. So for example, in Paris, we used a hotel conference room. Yeah, good questions. Anything else? Anything else? Okay, if you guys are okay, just for the folks that may be watching on YouTube, I did want to cover non-Seattle specific stuff just for a second, if you don't mind. So things are less complicated outside of the state of Washington. So this is the way things work for bootcamp options outside of Seattle. So essentially we have the dojo, the guru, and the sensei. Everything is 5 days because, not surprisingly, it's our belief that our target student, probably most students most of the time want all 5 days worth of material. So outside of Seattle, we only offer a 5-day option. And it's mainly around how much do you want to get. You can see the differences here, right? So the way to interpret this, and you'll notice the pricing is essentially the same at the guru and sensei levels. Dojo is actually a little bit cheaper than if you bought, you wouldn't buy Dojo 2 and Dojo 3 together. You just go to guru. But for folks not in Seattle, this is how you should think about it. Very easy. So the dojo is really intended for people who like to learn things on their own, which is totally fine. Because if you go back, you don't get the extra books, you don't get the office hours, and you don't get mentoring on the Kaggle project. You just come in, you only get 1 month access to the learning portal. You come in, you bootstrap in, you learn a few things, you grab the stuff out of the GitHub, and then you go on your merry little way. And that's totally cool. Some people are like that. Great, works. Guru is, I like learning with some support because you get more access to the learning portal in GitHub. You have longer access to those materials. So let's say you go to the boot camp, you get back to work, you got 1,000 emails in your inbox you got to work through, and it's 2 weeks before you get back around to your data science studies. No problem, right? You got access to the portal for 6 months, you got access to the GitHub. You have office hours, you can talk to one of us. It's great. And then of course, Sensei is, I want to solidify my learning with a mentored project. I have all the benefits of Guru, except for I get even more access to, I get 1 year's worth of access to the Learning Hub and the GitHub, and I also get mentored Kaggle competitions on top of that. So if you're outside of Seattle, this is how you should think about choosing which one of the options works for you. They're all equally valid. You just need to figure out which one helps you best achieve your goals. So for example, if you want to go to London and learn, this is the model you'd be looking at, not the other one. Which would be so flattering, by the way, if somebody said, you know what, I want to go see Dave in London teach. I mean, I would be insufferable. My wife would probably kill me. I would be so insufferable if that happened. Okay. That's for the folks that may be outside Seattle on YouTube. Okay. Back to questions. Any other questions?
How far ahead do you publish the schedule?
How far ahead do we publish the schedule? That is a really good question. Sir, you are just full of really good questions. So we publish out fairly far. You can see here we're going all the way out to June. And we do add cities as time goes on. So if you're outside the Seattle area, for example, and you want to check on how often we're adding stuff outside of the Seattle area, come back to the website periodically. If you're in Seattle, we're currently scheduled to have one in May. We haven't necessarily locked down the dates exactly yet, but we will be having one in May. So you'll know there's one coming up in May. And then if that one doesn't work for you, then come back to the site periodically and you can see when they're coming in May, Seattle. We tend to have the most frequent boot camps in a few hub cities, and that's just based, quite frankly, on demand. So you might imagine the bigger cities that are hotbeds of activity, we tend to have them more often. And Seattle is one of them. There's a lot of folks here interested in data science. There's a lot of tech companies, that sort of thing. So we have them fairly often in Seattle. And just for folks on YouTube, if you're interested in, if you see a city, if you see your preferred city, if you don't see a preferred city on the list, you can go to the schedule page here, and you'll notice that we have a long list of cities that we're entertaining. There's London, for example, and Paris, as well as Phoenix and Singapore, Sydney, Tokyo, Vancouver, BC, Dublin, Copenhagen. And what you do is just click on here and say notify me about it. And that achieves two things. One, it gets you on our subscription list so we can notify you. Second of all, it also helps us quantify demand. Because last thing I think you would hopefully we'd want to do is like schedule a boot camp, rent a room, get the food, and nobody shows up. That would be bad. So you kind of need to know how many people are interested as well. Okay. If there are no other questions, if you don't want to ask in front of everybody, I will hang out as long as people want to ask questions or talk. But I think we conclude this section, or this aspect of the presentation. We hope to see you in one of our boot camps very soon. Thank you. Pardon?
We can register through the website.
Yes, excellent question. Sorry. You can totally register through the website. We are an e-commerce company. So for example, you say, wow, that Dave guy, I really want to learn data science from him. So you would click on the Seattle, click register. Right, here's the Seattle boot camp. And you can come all the way down here. And you can register for which version you'd like. Like that. I think you know the answer to that. So the question is, why is Guru bigger than everyone else? Not so subtle marketing. I mean, to be absolutely honest, so to be completely blunt, if, like, for example, if one of my employees came to me and said, hey, I found this place called Data Science Dojo. Do we have training budget to cover it? And I took a look at it. This is what I would tell them to go register for. This is what I tell them to go register for. Most likely. That's why it's the biggest one. It's the biggest one. Now, some folks go over here because of the mentoring of the Kaggle competition. That's obviously an option as well. But a wise general manager taught me to be fiscally responsible. So I would say, okay, out of these two, it's probably not this, because most of the employees I managed didn't fall into either one of those categories. This wasn't enough. They didn't have the base knowledge to get the most out of this. They kind of needed all 5 days. And that's why it's bigger. It's because it's kind of the sweet spot. It's the Goldilocks option, essentially. Not that I wouldn't dissuade you, because I am an excellent mentor, by the way, just so you know. I am excellent at helping people with Kaggle competitions. Not that I would dissuade you from this option. Good question. Okay. Well, thank you, and I'll hang out. And if you want to ask me any types of questions, that's totally cool. Like if you want to ask me like, salary bands for program managers in Microsoft, we can talk about that too. Sure.
So after attending the boot camp, let me put this way. So as initially you started off, like I keep hearing people like, oh, you need PhDs and masters to become or like get into some kind of data scientist roles.
Yep.
So after doing this boot camp and doing some kind of learning and teaching oneself, will that PhD masters will be still required or?
Yeah. So if I could paraphrase the question.
Yeah.
I've been told that, really, if you really want to go get one of those really fancy data science jobs, you need a PhD in statistics or physics or something. And the answer is, that is actually true in a lot of cases, depending on the nature of the job, right? So if you're going to go to a brand new company, so for example, if you were going to be a principal level data scientist at Microsoft, coming from outside, if you didn't have a ton of industry experience already, yeah, you probably would need a PhD. That would kind of be an expectation. Now, there are tons and tons of data scientists that actually work in industry that don't have doctorate degrees. Typically what they end up doing is they learn on the job. They learn on the job. And here's the secret. If you can learn how to do data science on your job and eventually have someone give you the title, the official title of data scientist, that goes a long, long way going forward. Right? So a very good path is to work in your existing company. This is why we target the market that we do. And for example, BI developers are very common, or BI or analytics people are very common folks that come. John Butler is an example. They come to us to take their skill set to that next level, because a lot of companies are trying to build out that capability, and they don't necessarily want to, or they can't hire a bunch of PhDs from Caltech or wherever. So they say, look, you know what, I'm going to skill up my own team. So you get the skill, you do the job for a while within the company. Eventually, maybe they change your title to data scientist, and then you're off and running. Now, of course, as with everything else in a tech-related industry, especially in a West Coast technology company, if you go to an interview loop, you got to be able to go through the interview loop. Right? Even if you have the title of data scientist and you come into the interview and someone asks you a very basic machine learning question that you should know and you can't answer it, that's not good. Right? So there's always that aspect too. Good question. Anything else? Okay. Thank you. Thank you. Oh, no applause are necessary. Oh, jeez. Oh, jeez.